And welcome to Conversations. My name is Jason Plotkin. I am the Program Director at Congregation Emanu in Houston, Texas. And every week we sit down with a member of our congregation, the community, or perhaps even the sports world to discuss the current state of affairs. One of the things our listeners have told us is that they appreciate being exposed to nonprofit organizations for the first time, or perhaps learning more about an organization in the community that's doing great things that they were already aware of. This week, I'm excited to welcome Marvin Pierre, the co-founder and executive director of 8 Million Stories. Marvin, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're excited to have you on and excited to learn about your organization. So let's start there, Marvin. For those who are not familiar with 8 Million Stories, if you could give us like a 30,000 feet in the sky explanation of your organization, what its mission is.
So the 8 Million Stories program is a nonprofit based here in Houston, Texas, which focuses on giving second chance opportunities to disconnected youth who have either come in contact with the juvenile justice system, have dropped out of school for various reasons. And between the ages of 16 and 18, we work to give those young people second chances through education, vocational training, and social emotional support.
Well, I appreciate that little insight. And before we really dive into what your organization does, your background has some academic pieces and educational pieces and on your resume that brought you to this point. What are the things from your background, if you can share some of that with us? And also, you're in New York, from New York originally. How did you end up in Houston?
Yeah, so I'm a native New Yorker and now living in Houston. So I'm a proud Houstonian for the past 6 years. And so I originally started my professional career on Wall Street. I worked at Goldman Sachs for 2.5 years. And then when the recession hit, had to decide to make a transition out of finance and ended up in education. Primarily, my reason for going into education was I had an opportunity to be exposed to young people in the city of, in the borough of Brooklyn who were underperforming academically, specifically young boys of color. My best friend from prep school asked me to come in and talk about my journey and how I overcame similar obstacles and was able to be successful. And so after having a great conversation with those young men, I realized that many of those boys were performing under their academic levels. And so it was a 5th grade class, and most of those boys were reading on a 3rd grade level. And I, as a young man of color, knew what that meant for them, right? In terms of their future, that many of those boys would have a higher opportunity to be involved in the criminal justice system as they would have the opportunity to graduate from high school. So I decided to get into education with the idea of primarily starting impacting the lives of young boys of color and ultimately starting my own school for young boys of color. That was really grounded on the relationship that I had built with my surrogate father and mentor, Dr. Sam McFadden, who played an instrumental role in my life and helped me reach the level of success. And one of the things he always inspired me to do was always to reach back up and pull up another person as I climbed up the ladder of success, which he knew I would. And I felt that was my purpose in life, was to really help young people, especially young people coming up in very disadvantaged communities, find success similar to how I was. And ended up working at several charter schools in New York City, and really fell in love with an all-boys school model and wanted to develop one and create one of my own, and had success in elementary schools, but didn't have experience working with boys in a middle school setting, and learned about KIPP Houston Public Schools. And they had an all-boys school called KIPP Polaris, and decided to, apply for the assistant principal job that I felt would give me an opportunity to learn more about the needs of young boys at the middle school level, so that I can really build a unique school that meets the needs of boys of color K through 8.
I really like how you talked about pulling someone up the ladder with you, and that was really fascinating. And as a co-founder of an organization, I think we can dig deeper into what led to the organization's beginnings. So what were your driving interests, and maybe, elaborate on some of the story that you were telling about your own self that were the driving factors in starting this organization?
I think I was not always the smart kid and the perfect kid. And so I think for me, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for someone like Dr. McFadden taking a chance on my life. And what gravitated me to education was really my passion for servicing young people that I think we disregard often, especially in our school systems. And I know that I realized that my gift was with this population. I just had a unique gift to be able to connect with young boys and just young kids who were really having trouble, whether it's academically or behaviorally in schools, and helping those young people get back on track. And so I really uncovered that that was my gift. And I have become, over the past, I have about 9 to 10 years of educational experience. And what I realized was that, for me, what was the driving factor was that I think people who are gifted with amazing skill sets should be taking on life's most pressing issues. And I've always been one to take on the situations or challenges that many people have said, that requires too much work. I'm not really interested in that. And one of the issues that I uncovered in my work around working with young boys of color was this idea around the school to prison pipeline and how that really impacts the life trajectory of many of our young people, not just here in Houston, but across the country. And when I did some research on Houston specifically, I uncovered that on an annual basis, 12,000 young people between the ages of 10 to 18 come in contact with our juvenile justice system. And when you look at why they're in the system to begin with, many of these offenses are not situations that are considered to be a threat to our community. And a lot of these offenses or consequences or charges that these kids receive are things that should be handled in the schoolhouse. But our schools have now become the fast track for our young people to come in contact with our justice system. So no longer, when I was in school, if you had a fight or you said something inappropriate to a teacher or a classmate, you either got a suspension or detention. At worst, it was an out-of-school suspension, and you would be able to still come back to school. But nowadays, our schools are no longer that place, right? And so if a kid commits any act of a fight or says something inappropriate to a teacher that is deemed to be a threat, they are now being escorted out of schools in handcuffs. And so I realized that for me, my best work would be to try to help to change the narrative and really create better opportunities for our young people to be successful, especially the ones that are being pushed out of our schools at disproportionately rates.
You really gave a good background on why and the how of what brought this organization together, and your personal passion and your personal drive to overcome the obstacles. I think when you talk to someone who started their own organization, regardless of what kind of organization it is, or even an institution, I think you face big challenges in getting off the ground. What were some of your biggest challenges that you had in getting off the ground as an organization?
I think our biggest challenge, and continues to be the biggest challenge, is funding. Funding to support an initiative that is not considered like the best thing, like something that everyone signs up to do. No one says, I want to go volunteer with kids who have committed crimes and kids who are in gangs and kids who do negative things in the community. And to be able to articulate in a compelling way to local funders and national funders that these kids deserve a second chance at life. And the only way that they can do that is by us being able to receive funding to hire staff that bring unique skill sets that can really tap into the potential of these young people, that they all have potential. It's just a matter of us finding the people that can actually unpack that and bring that potential to life. And, I realized that was the hardest thing for me that I had to do. But I felt that my personal story and how I overcame and the impact that people had on my life that essentially saved my life was compelling enough for people to really believe that, one, I was going to be someone that was committed to this work and this mission, and that I also brought the skill sets and experience that was needed to ensure that these young people really had an equitable opportunity to be successful in life. And, fortunately, I'm proud to say that we're still standing here today because, when this program first started, it was $60,000 in the hole, no funding to support staff, salaries, operational costs, and the other needs that we have for our students. And I had to really learn how to, raise money relatively quickly. And, I just really bet on myself. And that's something that I've stayed true to ever since, and just being very transparent with funders and people who are interested in our work in terms of like how difficult our work is and what our real needs are.
Well, when at the end of this conversation, you and I will get a chance to share ways people can learn more about your organization and give. And I'll also, when we're done, make sure that you have information on our FARB fund at Emanu, which is a granting organization, if you will, to give funds to upstart or growing nonprofits. But one of the things that I really think is interesting is when you established your organization, one of the keys is obviously the young people that you're touching, right? The young people that you're trying to provide services to and are trying to take advantage of your offerings. So how do you gain credibility? How did you find these young people to really take off?
Well, a lot of the referrals came from probation departments and also HISD, our local school districts, who were looking to find alternative placements for students who were overage and undercredited, and returning back into a traditional high school setting was not ideal. So we had a lot of referrals from different sources in the community as well to support, the work that we're doing. I remember our first cohort of kids was about 40 kids, and every single young person, it was actually 40 young boys, all boys, and every single kid was in a gang. And so real learning experience, and it was a real challenge because you had rival gangs in the same classroom setting, and you had to make sure that they were not focused on hurting each other, but rather focused on learning. And that's really how we got our start, and just really making sure that we were on the ground and being very aware of like the challenges in this work. And I'm really proud that we were able to be successful in navigating those challenges that we initially were faced with.
And your organizational philosophy, and correct me if I'm wrong, is based around what I view as 3 pillars: education, employment, and emotion. Based on what you've shared, obviously, and probably what I would have assumed, education and employment are something that come to mind quickly, but really speak to the emotional pillar. I mean, you and I were both teenage boys at one point. I'm sure others watching this were teenagers at one point, obviously, right? But speak to the emotional pillar and the importance of that pillar in your work.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we strongly believe, right, education and job training and employment placement is important, but without that cannot actually happen for our kids if we don't have or create a space rather that develops this personal connection with our students in an authentic way. And what we want to make sure that, and what we say all the time, is that love is the foundation, right? So at 8 Million Stories, our goal, regardless of like where our kids have been, what they've done, we make a personal commitment to love on them unconditionally. And what I think our kids really enjoy is that they make mistakes, and we remind them that that is the process of their personal growth, right? As young people, you are going to make mistakes. If I expect you to make the right decision every single time, I'm not setting a realistic expectation for you. And so we give them spaces and opportunities to feel comfortable in messing up and knowing that you're going to get another opportunity to do this better. But what we also remind them that is that, all right, as you make a mistake, what we don't want you to do is repeat that mistake. So how do we, when you make a mistake or have a setback, how do we ensure that that doesn't repeat itself? And if it does, how do we respond to it in a better way? And so I think for us, love is the foundation, and creating a safe space for our kids to feel comfortable in is a top priority with us. Because if they're not comfortable, if they're constantly having to look over their shoulder and make sure that they're protected at all times and nothing's going to happen to them, there's no way for learning to actually take place. And so we make sure that we're intentional about how we create a safe space for them, because that is also emotional triggers for them, mentally and physically. And a lot of our kids have experienced a lot of trauma in their life as young adults. And the minute those childhood trauma situations are re-triggered, they disconnect from whatever type of program they're plugged into. And so our goal is to always ensure that they feel safe at all times, regardless of what's happening and what other types of services are taking place.
And you talked about a safe space. And I really think one of the great challenges right now, probably more so than usual, is the ability to connect with our young people. I think, hopefully in the fall, there's some semblance of routine. Obviously, the schools have all been pushed back, and a lot of in-person opportunities are just not happening. So what do you find regularly when we're not in the pandemic? What are the best ways to connect with young people within your community, within that safe space? And what are you finding right now, while we're kind of socially distant, is the best way to maintain that connection with those young people?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think in terms of like staying connected with them, I really have found that community members who come into our space and interact in person with our kids have walked away with, one, like a strong sense that they've actually done something really positive in the life of a young person. But most importantly, what it does for that young people, those young adults that we serve, is that it shows them that there is a wide range of community members that are really cheering for their success, right? They're advocating for their success and that believe in them. And I think that's one of the things our kids really walk away with when we bring in a lot of community organizations or, folks who want to volunteer in our program. We have a lot of people that come in and tutor our kids and have played a critical role in our kids passing their high school, earning their high school equivalency diplomas. And for our kids, those are lifelong relationships that they'll forever remember. Our kids always, even our alumni, constantly talk about how, they, wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for a local community member that came in 3 times a week and spent time teaching them how to be successful at math. And so I think plugging in real time is really impactful for this group, because one of the things that our kids struggle to overcome is broken promises from adults. A lot of adults in their lives have promised them so many things and have fell short of those promises. And one of the things that our kids have to start to, overcome is that, I can trust adults again, and it's safe to do so. And so I think the best place to do that is in person. The pandemic has been challenging for us because, our kids don't do well in a virtual setting. A lot of them are living in conditions that are really not conducive to learning or just conducive to living, right? And so there's a lot of abuse that happens in their homes, a lot of things that are negative temptations that, could potentially lend them back into trouble. And 8 Million Stories was a safe space for them. So when they had that opportunity to spend almost 8 hours a day at our facilities, it was an escape from some of those toxic environments that they were dealing with on a daily basis. And now with COVID, we see a lot of our kids regressing back into past behaviors because there's just really no positive outlets for them to tap into. So a couple of our girls are pregnant. We had 2 kids end up back in jail, but this time within the adult system. And then we had 1 kid we lost that was killed right as COVID had started to take off. And so for us, that's one of the things that keeps me up at night, is like, how do we, within our control, continue to try to advocate and protect our youth until we can actually get them back into our building and serving them in person again.
Yeah, I really do find, and I'm sorry to hear about some of these circumstances, that, there's definitely fragile communities that we've seen. Obviously, those who are elderly or might feel disconnected due to COVID. Everyone's routine is thrown off. You brought up people, the kids had a comfort space where they could learn and thrive with your organization. Now they're in their homes, which might be a tricky situation in a lot of circumstances. But what are some of the other concerns you have for young people, whether they're in your organization or other young folks that you have mentored along the way? Just some things you're thinking about during the pandemic right now that concern you.
I just think about, as we talk about schools reopening and what that looks like, I think the assumption is that we're being inclusive of all children and all youth. And I personally don't think that is the case. When we talk about what school looks like for a reopening, we're oftentimes leaving out the disconnected youth who were disconnected prior to COVID and have now become even more disconnected during this pandemic. And what we're seeing around Houston is a huge trend of young people, especially our high school students, making a decision to pursue full-time jobs as opposed to engaging in school, because the present situations have put them in a really difficult situation where they have to decide, Do I support my family who could be facing eviction every single month? Like we're struggling to make rent or the mortgage, or we're struggling to find food in the house to eat? Or do I log in every day to school? And a lot of kids are choosing the former, right? They're choosing to go to work and saying school is going to take a backseat. And so my worry is that our high school dropout rates will increase as a result of COVID. And that is not a conversation that many people are having right now across our city. You're not hearing that conversation from our local school districts. You're not hearing that conversation from our foundations about how do we ensure that organizations that are tasked with servicing this population receive the adequate level of support, whether that's through funding or resources to service this population that is now going to actually double. I actually spoke to some local officials within schools and saying dropout rates are going to drastically increase. And what do we do with those young people, right? They're out there in our communities, and how are we going to now try to re-engage them in either going back to school or deciding to say, okay, if you're not going to go back to school full time, how can we get you on track to be enrolled in a program like 8 Million Stories to get your high school equivalency diploma so that you can also be in the conversation of finding a pathway to post-secondary education or a meaningful career that ultimately breaks this cycle for generational poverty. And that is the biggest concern for me when we're talking about our work at 8 Million Stories. It's not about getting a kid a GED or the kid got a job. It's how do we get our young people to be in positions to break generational poverty? And how do we position them that way through the programming that we provide and the level of support that we're providing as well? Because I think that's the only way our city is going to get better. And we have a major issue around our middle skills gap, that for jobs that are not being filled because our community and the young people that are in position to fill those jobs don't have the educational skills or the job skills to fill them. And so how do we create ways to motivate them to do that? And I think that's one of the things that has made 8 Million Stories a unique program, is that it's been able to capture a population that many community-based organizations have struggled to engage in a consistent way.
You know, you really localized and compartmentalized some very serious issues that I don't think are getting the coverage. So I really do appreciate you bringing up the concerns about the high school dropout rate. You know, even on the opposite side of the spectrum, I have a 4-year-old who is Black as my son, and I'm concerned about the growth and development. There's no way you can get that. And as a high schooler, middle school to high school, that's another important step, obviously, in the development of a young person, like you said, trying to break the cycle and really try to take them to the next level. Now let's dig deeper into the pandemic. I think as we started the pandemic, you know, it took our organizations and our institutions a bit of time to really assess what was happening around us. I mean, you've brought up the fact that your young people were having to make tough decisions, whether it's working or school. Obviously, the virtual or digital platform, whatever you want to call it, doesn't necessarily work regardless of age, depending on especially whatever environment you're in. If there's only one computer in the house or your parents are working on the computer, etc. What was in the initial happenings in your organization, and how did you respond as we're like having to separate, social distance? What was happening?
It's just so I can understand your question.
What did your organization do to pivot, if you will, at the onset of the pandemic, once you're like, okay, we're in this is not a short-term thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we just had to kind of mirror what everyone else was doing in terms of just like the going online virtual classrooms. So we started Google Classroom platforms to service our kids and really started to ramp up what social services would look like for our kids in terms of our case management. So allocating more of our staff who may have been on the educational side to like really support on the case management side and really ensuring that our parents and our students had access to quality resources to sustain themselves during these difficult and uncertain times. And, you know, that's something that we continue to see. And, you know, it's really challenging for us because, you know, as we started to call more parents and families, we just realized like people were in some really difficult situations. And, you know, for us, because we were well connected in the community and people were really passionate about what we were doing, we were able to support a lot of our families with some of their needs. And that was a really bright spot in this really challenging time. And just to know that our students and our families were really appreciative of 8 Million Stories and the support that we were able to provide to them during, this difficult time. Although it's not a long-term fix, but it was a way for them to kind of at least have some sense of relief and comfort that things will get better. And, we're continuing to find avenues to support our families during this time as well.
You talked about helping families in probably ways you hadn't been helping them previously during the pandemic. I like to really hone in on a positive story that might resonate with you, that you're thinking about, that, wow, we really did this right, or really made a difference on this person or this family that we wouldn't have if it weren't for the pandemic in some form or fashion.
Yeah, we had one of our students, she was one of our female students. She was pregnant at the time, and we were just doing our routine calls to our families to just check in, and uncovered, mom had shared with us that the refrigerator had gone out and it couldn't be repaired. And so she didn't have the finances to repair the refrigerator because she had recently lost the job. And then we were also checking in on our student to see how was the pregnancy going, and uncovered that she too was lacking resources. In fact, she didn't have a bed, right? She was sleeping on the floor, sharing the bed with her siblings. And so for us, we realized that we needed to tap into the local community and organizations that were providing some COVID-19 relief funds to our families in need. And we're really appreciative of our families being able to receive access to those funds and access to getting a refrigerator or, a new bed so that they can purchase the things that they needed to be, self-sufficient and, not have to really live in a deficit. And so for us, it was just really challenging to know that, if we hadn't done the outreach and reaching out, a lot of our families wouldn't have told us their situations, because many of them, probably are ashamed of what was going on. But to know the relief and how parents were really appreciative of the level of support was really a feel-good story for sure.
All right, 2 final questions. The first one being one that I feel I always have to ask our guests, because I think we all have learned something during the current state of affairs with the pandemic. I think we're all making changes. What is one thing that's going to stick that you have done since the pandemic that you weren't necessarily doing before, or maybe not focusing on as much, that you think is going to stick in the long run for your organization?
I think it would definitely be emergency relief funds for our families. I think that plays such a critical role. And for us, we were so focused on making sure the kids got enough resources that we neglected to think about the needs of the families and how that played into the focus of our students. If I'm a student, and although I feel supported by 8 Million Stories, but I know my mother is struggling, I'm still not at ease. The stress level is still there, and the uncertainty is still there in my life. And so how do we ensure that not only we continue to support our kids, but also our families? And so being intentional about trying to develop funds to address emergency situations that our students and families come across often.
Right. And then the last thing, and you kind of gave us some insight into this, I always love to end on a positive note or a takeaway. I think the 30 minutes or so we've spent today, we've certainly learned a lot about 8 Million Stories. We've learned about the great work that you're doing to mentor these young people and the changes you're making in their life, which will ultimately benefit all of us. But if there's people out there who are watching who might not have known of this organization or want to be interested in the organization, how can they get involved in 8 Million Stories or help your organization in its pursuit of its mission?
Yeah, they can reach out to us via our website. It's www.8millionstories, the number 8 spelled out, millionstories.org. And you can check the link, contact us, and it'll direct you to be in contact with a representative from the organization that'll be able to get you involved in what we're doing.
All right, and we will put those links and information in the Facebook post when we post this. Again, thank you, Marvin, for coming on. I was thrilled to learn more about 8 Million Stories. David Tanner behind the scenes recording things for us. You can't see him, but he does make a difference in allowing this to go on. But let me promote our upcoming conversations. Next week's conversations, next Wednesday, we're going to have a special father-to-father episode as I engage with my good friend Mark Schlesinger, the head men's basketball coach at the NCAA Division I University of New Orleans. Coach Schles, like myself, is a white father of a multiracial family, trying to make sense of how we navigate issues of race and difficult conversations within our family. Upcoming episodes. Beyond that, we have the Houston Symphony cellist and our own Colnitri cellist, Brenton Smith, on Wednesday, August 12th. And a little breaking news, we are going to have Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo coming up soon. Stay tuned for details in Synagogue Communications. Again, this is Jason Plotkin. Conversations every Wednesday or thereabouts at noon on the Congregation Emanu Facebook page and on the Polar Chapel streaming. Again, thanks to our guest, Marvin Pierre. We will catch you next time. Have a good one.